All right, Azadeh Zabedi is a human rights lawyer. She is actually with the Committee of Anglo-Iranian Lawyers. And she has said in the past that women have paid an exceptionally high price for this resistance in Iran. These years of resistance, quote unquote, have resulted in thousands of political prisoners being tortured and executed. Azadeh, welcome.
Thank you so much, Dana. Appreciate being on.
It has been a incredible year in Iran. And where do you think it has brought the women's movement in Iran?
As you say, it has been an incredible year. I should point out that the Iranian people really have for some 44 years now been resisting tyranny and oppression and savagery and brutality. This really is, without exception, one of the worst and barbaric regimes, certainly of my generation. I'm sure many of your viewers and listeners will know, but the Iranian regime per capita of population has executed more people than anywhere else on earth. In terms of rights of women, ethnic minorities, linguistic minorities, religious minorities, this really is a regime where, without exception, the 88 million people who are currently living in Iran really do live in a state prison that is otherwise known as the Islamic Republic of Iran. As you will know, this weekend was the one-year anniversary of the 2022 uprising, where sparked as it was by the death in police custody of Mahsa Amini, a young Kurdish girl who was visiting Tehran, was brutally and savagely beaten in police custody when she was picked up by a routine sort of drive-through by Iran's very perversely named morality police. Since then, there have been really, in terms of scope, we've never seen anything like this in Iran. Whilst it's not by any means the first uprising, but it very much in terms of scope is an indication of the fact that this regime is on its knees and it really is imminent and inevitable that it will be gone.
If I can, kind of edge through this a little bit with you, because there's a lot of things that have happened even in the last week. But when we talk about the uprising that occurred since Mahsa Amini's death, did that change anything? Because I think a lot of people who don't follow Iran day by day get confused. There's more violence, there's more people in the street. It moves from page one to kind of tragically the back pages of some of the newspapers and newscasts. But people would say that women have gained ground in the last year. Is that me interpreting the news in a way that I shouldn't? Or has there been advances by women, do you think, by them standing up to the regime in the last year?
I really wish that I could say, Dana, with all my heart, that there have been advancements for women, but only in the news recently have we heard that within the past 24 hours or so, in the Iranian Majlis, that's the Iranian parliament, a bill has been passed through parliament that is going to make things a lot worse for women. It's a very draconian bill that's being passed through, which is in effect making the lives of women a lot more difficult, especially in terms of their dress code. And one of the issues that I think is going to be a big issue for women is the fact that there's going to be the possibility of a 10-year prison sentence for inappropriately dressing. So things are not getting better, they're certainly getting worse. But what I'm pleased to say is that really this uprising, if anything, is really showing the West that a decision needs to be made in terms of what their relationship is going to be with the Iranian regime. Because
I want to ask you that, but the bill essentially changes what? I mean, the measures, I don't even like using the term morality police because they're not moral. They commit murders. So, that's what they dub themselves. I mean, but the repressive foot soldiers of the regime might be more apropos. How does this law change anything or possibly make it worse when it was already so draconian?
Exactly, so draconian. How could it possibly be any worse? Given that this is a regime whose one of the main pillars of this regime is really misogyny and a hatred of women, and really a hatred of genuinely all of the values that we hold very dear in the free world. So this does make things a lot worse. But what I would say is the Iranian people have certainly never bowed down to tyranny and oppression, and for 44 years have really been taking to the streets, making their voices heard. And from my perspective, I see myself as someone who has really the immense fortune and the privilege of living in the free world. I have a duty and a responsibility to speak up for my countrymen and women and to really raise their voice in terms of giving a voice to them in the West. And that voice is really that the Iranian people want freedom, they want democracy, they want liberty, and really a secular democracy and a republic.
Okay. We know what the desire is, and I don't in any way treat any of that lightly. I mean, the thirst for freedom has gone on tragically for decades in Iran, but you know, a lot of people from the West don't see progress in Iran, and they don't see a larger hope for them being able to change the regime or break away from the regime. So it's really important to hear from somebody like yourself, who you've just come back from meeting with the European Union. You obviously feel that pressure can be applied. What do you tell them? What do you ask for?
Right. Well, I think it's important just to point out that the Iranian people have never sought, and nor do they desire in any way, shape or form, whether it's militarily or financially, any external interference in our internal affairs. However, what we also will not accept is this sitting on the fence that has thus far been the policy that has been pursued in particular in the European Union and certainly in the UK. And really this policy of appeasement or reproachment. I don't think there are enough words in the thesaurus to cover the policies that have been applied and that have really failed. But not only that, I would go further and to say that have made things a lot more dangerous for citizens of the world.
Is that because the human rights discussion takes kind of goes to the back of the bus, because the nuclear discussion is so front and center that in the end people are some Western nations are willing to make a deal or you know, try to appease Iran somehow if they can get them to step away from nuclear development and, you know, maybe say to hell with human rights in Iran?
Well, I think I would say that on the one hand, it's desperate naivety. And on the other hand, perhaps a more sinister foolishness in terms of what the Iranian regime stands for, what it's capable of. And I think it was Winston Churchill who said that appeasement is feeding the crocodile, hoping that it will eat you last. And unfortunately, you know, I think the situation quite recently that was in the news with respect to the Biden administration and the hostages is very much the best, in my opinion, recent example of appeasement. And however much the Biden administration would have us or have their electorate see this as more palatable, you know, this really was it was a ransom money and also a deal with the devil, in my opinion. But there's also been a lot of examples of appeasement by the UK government and the EU government. So today...
So can we just, since you touched on hostages,
yeah,
and I don't mean to interrupt, but let's just deal with that. So you have 5 American hostages that are joyously returned to their families, people who had been, you know, in the worst prisons in Iran for years. Why is that not an achievement by the Biden administration?
Absolutely. Look, I mean, as somebody who has had family members who have spent a great deal of time in Evin prison, both under the dictatorial regime of the Shah and under the dictatorial regime of the current theocracy. I know more than anyone the despicable conditions that those hostages will have been held in Evin prison. So absolutely, we empathize with the families, and of course are very happy for them that they have been released. But our stance is they should never have been taken in the first place. And unfortunately, hostage taking since the inception of the Iranian regime has really been an incredibly lucrative business. And it pays, because governments will pay. So, as I said, however much the Biden administration wants to dress this up and tell us that this money will be going to, I think they called it humanitarian organizations that are non-sanctionable, so for medicine and for food, the truth of the matter is we all know where that money is going to go. And that money is going to go to, through, I am sure, a labyrinth of entities and organizations and companies. What that money will do is make its way up straight to the very top to fund the IRGC, who are responsible for repression inside of Iran, but also terrorism outside of Iran. But also, it will also, the money will make its way to the very highest echelons of Iranian society, to the supreme leader and to other individuals. So unfortunately, from my perspective, what the Biden administration has done has made life a lot more dangerous for individuals who hold US citizenship and European citizenship. And I really would be afraid with those passports to be traveling anywhere where I'm in reach of the Iranian regime, because, as I said, it pays.
I mean, that's going to frighten a lot of people. Cash for hostages, which the U.S. administration, Washington denied, but certainly they have their critics on the other side of the House and the Senate that said this was an outrageous thing to do and it was the wrong thing to do. But is returning to the street and people protesting for rights, what is going to happen now? You're saying the laws are going to get tougher. The Iranian regime has apparently not learned anything from demonstrations that swept the nation. I mean, they were in every city that I could see, and it was constant, and it was bloody, and so they won't step back, and it looks like the Iranian people won't step back either. What happens?
So in terms of the scope of the uprising, you're absolutely right. It was in over 282 cities, every single province in Iran. So whilst we had uprisings before, this was very, very different in terms of the age groups involved, in terms of the fact that it was all walks of life and very much all over the country. But really, what will happen now is that we are on a course for the overthrow of this regime. The ferocity of and the anger of the chants on the streets very much is an indication of the fact that the Iranian people want this regime overthrown, but also the fact that the Iranian regime, I think in Tehran alone, had over 50,000 state police onto the streets, really shows that they were very much expecting the fact that there were, I believe, several hundred incidences of people again taking to the streets and really chanting their slogans, which is that they wanted, regime change in its entirety. And I think the fact that the Iranian regime has introduced, for example, this new hijab law is very much an indication of its weakness. The Iranian regime, I believe, and the people at the very top of the regime do know that their days are numbered, and the suppression is very much an indication of really trying to, if they let go of any of that suppression, then that really will be the end of this regime.
People have been saying that for years, though, that the Iranian regime is on its last legs. Is it wishful thinking, or do you believe in your heart that we're entering that chapter?
I don't believe that it is wishful thinking. Honestly, I think that it's, of course, as an Iranian in exile, it's what I would like to see more than anything else in the world. But I really am optimistic because I'm seeing real changes. And in order for these achievements really to be made, I think it's very important for governments in the world to take a responsible policy with respect to the Iranian regime, and that involves not appeasing the regime. Whilst verbal condemnation is absolutely welcome, this kind of finger wagging at the regime, although it were, an unruly toddler, is absolutely not acceptable when we're dealing with a regime as vile, as despicable as this one, but also a regime that very much wants to see, as I said, the end of the liberties that we do enjoy in the West.
If you delivered that message to the European Union in your meetings, when they asked you, okay, well, and I assume they did, what do you want to happen? What is the specifics of, if it's not criticism and warning and finger wagging, what did you recommend to them?
Well, certainly in this respect, I would say that the US is ahead. What we would like to see in Europe and in the United Kingdom is for the IRGC to be prescribed as a terrorist organization. And the reluctance of the EU and the UK government in doing so is really rather baffling to the Iranian people and also those of us in exile. There is this extraordinary situation that we have, certainly in the UK, where we have the children of the terrorists, the godfather of terrorism, prescribed as terrorist organizations, but not really the godfather itself. It's long overdue for the IRGC to be recognized as a terrorist organization, but also there are other steps. I mean, as an Iranian exile—
By the way, that's the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps.
Absolutely.
And,
they
are the muscle, the henchmen of the regime. And
absolutely.
what does classifying them as a terrorist organization do exactly?
Well, it stops the money train. It really does. I mean, this is an organization that is responsible for internal repression, but more importantly, it has its tentacles in Syria and in Yemen. It has its tentacles in Iraq and in Afghanistan, in Gaza and the West Bank, and also, more importantly, or more recently, should I say, its interference in the Ukraine. So, which leads me to the next point. What else would we like to see? I would like to see really a recognition of the right of the Iranian people to stand up to the tyranny and the oppression of the Iranian regime. I would like the West to recognize our people's right to really defend themselves against the IRGC. And it's really in tone. So it's, I guess it's the way that it's put across, the way that we have very rightly support for the Ukrainian people. I do truly believe that the Iranian people are deserving of support.
In terms of arms, or what are you suggesting?
No. But for me, it's a recognition of the right to defend themselves. And it's the way that it's portrayed. So that to me would give very much a message to the Iranian people that they have the support of the West in principle. And also it would give a message, a strong and robust and concrete message to the Iranian regime that really the West means business in terms of the fact that the rights of the Iranian people are being recognized and supported.
Last question to you, and I know you're not a nuclear expert, you're a lawyer, but do you believe that this regime, despite all the smoke and mirrors, is still pursuing a nuclear weapon? And knowing everything that you know about them, what would the mullahs, the Iranian regime, represent to the world if they had a nuclear weapon, if they're able to obtain one?
In terms of, are they pursuing? I would say absolutely. I mean, there is no doubt in my mind that they are. And I say this because that would really be to them the trump card in terms of keeping the regime in place. It would be a very powerful really tool for them to have. I mean, to have the bomb really would, I guess, would then make it very, very difficult for the regime to be overthrown. So they are absolutely pursuing it in terms of—
And what would that regime look like with a nuclear a nuclear weapon in possession of a nuclear weapon?
Well, absolutely terrifying one. Really, the thought of the Iranian regime having a nuclear bomb is one that really should terrify all of us, given the fact that this is a regime that has very openly said that it wants to see the destruction of Israel as well as other states. So, as I said, a terrifying one, and one that we should be doing everything in our power to make sure that it's not an ambition that is realized.
Azadeh Zabedi, it's great to talk to you. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.